I believe with dynos as well as with captive cams. I mean, unlike a lot of other photographers and how we see a lot of the work that photographers, like ongoing projects, how they work, you very rarely get to see projects in almost their entirety or how they're being shot directly on Instagram. And I think that's been a great way to access your work, and that's how I came across it, and I'm sure that's how it reaches a lot of people. That I just wanted to know what the motivation behind that was, and what are the challenges, I guess, of doing that versus what advantages you face as someone who really prioritizes narrative over over a sort of a complete project, but you're sort of working through this narrative that you wish to share.
So the first thing is that with time, I've grown very disillusioned with the idea of websites because they are very two-dimensional in the way they can present multifaceted bodies of work. So right now, I don't have a website. Alongside that sort of growing disillusionment with a website, I mean, it's also because I came out with 2 books in 2018, and then the three-dimensionality that you can achieve with books, and then you look at the same work online, it doesn't make the same impact. So yeah, so I just let that go, and then I've just been really occupied with other things to think about what a proper website could be. I was very late to Instagram. Let's be, so I'm not, and I don't do, so I don't use Instagram as a way to promote the projects per se. They are essentially very intrinsic to the way a narrative is built. So Instagram, so I wanted to use Instagram as something which is very central to a project itself. So right now I have 4 Instagrams, which are actually projects themselves. I mean, the projects are because of Instagram. So let's say with captive cams, for example, Instagram was great to showcase hyperlapse videos of animals exhibiting repetitive locomotive disorder. Then you could also do boomerangs, where you could show like very minute human-animal interactions, where somebody's like throwing a stone at an animal, and then you could repeat that to infinity so that it becomes a crazy, So Instagram's language helped me to create these sort of narrative, to create these narrative structures in a sense. And it's also very evolving, like the project. I mean, my projects, I don't necessarily see them as having a beginning and an end. They are sort of elaborate explorations of a theme or a thematic. And, and Instagram allows you to do that, because it doesn't on a website, you would go from beginning to end. Instagram does not really do that. You can keep evolving, and, you keep adding things as and when they come. It does not, there's no pressure to, do something today or tomorrow. And sometimes, and it also helps it works as the project itself. It works as, it works as a space where you share your research. So a lot of the times I share texts from philosophers, other writers that have written something on animals in captivity, or human beings in relation to animals in captivity, or in the case of dinosaurs, So it helps you to bring about all of these things. I share memes, I share other things, So the projects progress in a very multifaceted way, let's say. I also share archival footage from my own works, but other works, other photographers. Also, very importantly, which is more important in the case of panoptic cams, where I'm looking at surveillance and CCTVs. I also function as an admin in a sense, so I invite other people to, guest post. So there is that feature as well, which kind of enriches the project. It's not really about me or my project. It's about an idea, an understanding, and how best we can create a very deepened sense of understanding of a particular thing. So in panoptic cams, for example, there are images of CCTVs for the last 4 years that I've been shooting. And, it's a repository of 400 posts on CCTVs, and growing. So, I mean, I don't know what's going to, what the form will be, but we'll see. I mean, it's just, these are projects.
So I guess finally, I'll just ask you if you could just speak a little bit about what you have going on at the moment. I believe you have multiple projects that you're working on at the moment. And if you could just share something from your ongoing work.
I'm in the middle of multiple projects right now. So one is I'm working on a film of project on picnics, which was a photography project, which came out as a book. It was a long-term photography project. And then that engagement sort of evolved into a film project. And right, that's what I've been developing. And like the last few weeks, we were shooting, during the pandemic, we were shooting the picnic season in Eastern India. And, I mean, it's been a challenge, but it's also been like, it's been crazy, but very insightful. And, look, I mean, the idea of a picnic is is inherently opposed to the idea of social distancing and a pandemic. So that was kind of our departure. That was our point of departure for this year's shoot. The picnic photography project was more of a socio-cultural phenomenon, whereas the picnic film project is more political, and it looks at the current political context of the times we live in and how that seeps into like a very banal situation such as a picnic. So that's kind of one of the main focus points. So it looks at, and then you have the pandemic, then you have a lot of the picnics happen in the spaces that were destroyed by the cyclone that hit Bengal during in May, I think last year, and during the pandemic. So a lot of the landscape is very ravaged by cyclones, which you could directly attribute to climate change. So the film looks at a lot of different things to create a fairly telling portrait of contemporary India, or at least that's what we're trying to do. So that's what I've been working on. Climate change, I have a long-term engagement, and there are 3 projects that I've been developing. Again, to go back to the idea of the trilogy, there are 3 projects on climate change, which look at the same side of climate change, which is the Bengal Delta, spread across India and Bangladesh, but through they each propose different ways of seeing. So the first one is more journalistic, and it looks at the daytime situation in climate change-ridden landscapes and islands. The second one is a night-based flash project, as we were discussing before. Mm-hmm. And the third is a project where I use infrared photography, and it also happens at night. So they each push a deeper conceptualization or understanding of what climate change means. And gradually I sort of introduced this idea of trying to understand what, with like the terminology that we frequently encounter is this war against climate change. And before that, there was the war against terrorism. And right now there is the war against the pandemic. So at various times we are we use this war. We are always on a war footing, right? So you have we are very quick to announce wars against things. And these are sort of very planetary things. They are not things focused on a particular space or place, even though the local context is important, of course, and determines how local populations react to them. They are things on a planetary scale, what like the philosopher Timothy Morton would call hyper objects, things that are spread across space and time and not necessarily visible to the eye per se. So I was trying to build what you could call an equivalence between the global war on terror and the war against climate change, and what these settings could look like if you thought of them as war zones, So my point of departure was this, and the fact that like at night, the water becomes, to many people, to a lot of people, this sort of omnipotent, omnipresent enemy that could come and attack from nowhere and then carry away your children, family, neighbors, relatives, and without leaving any trace. So that was, and that is kind of what the war, like that is what terror kind of means, right? And so I wanted to create a visual repertoire that attempts an understanding of this. So that's what the night project is about. At darkness, like climate change in the depths of the night. And then with infrared photography, I've been trying to push that reading even further, because infrared photography is directly used in conflict zones and for surveillance photography. So how do you look at, so basically I was looking at the specters that climate change has left behind. So that would be buildings that have been ruined, and then people who linger on those front lines in these spaces. So, yeah, so that's kind of something that I've been working on. So it's a very elaborate sort of project. And then there's also film component to that I'm developing. So it's a multifaceted project. Like if you look at it in its entirety, my experience with the pandemic has been extremely weird, let's say, because for the first 6 months I was in France and I couldn't come back because there were no flights, and so I was supposed to be there for 3 months, and that got extended to 6 months.
Okay.
And so I was living in a beautiful artist residency in South France, and I mean, I couldn't share any of it because that would have been shitty, but I had a very different experience of the pandemic for the longest time. But I also kept thinking that I wanted to work on this very on this moment, which is a watershed moment, in at least in our lives for sure, the pandemic. And I'd not been able to do that. So when I finally got to come back in August, I was thinking of what I could do, and that kind of, out of many things that came to mind, one thing was to look at the Hindu festivals that would be happening. Because I mean, in Eastern India, like, you have a string of festivals that happen from September onwards. So there's so it starts with Vishwakarma Pujo, and then Durga Pujo, and then Diwali, Kali Pujo, and then there's Jagadhatri Pujo. It goes on. Then there's Rash Mela, which looks at Krishna and Radha. It just goes on for like 3 months, and in different places in Bengal that kind of specialize in these different things. And there was Chhat Puja as well. So I wanted to look at, and this became a point of contention because, the government and there were PILs saying that we should completely ban the festival. So there was a big tussle. And at that point of time, we didn't know, like, if you allowed the festivals, whether there would be an explosion of cases. Thankfully, it's not being the case. But so I did a project on that, looking at that entire time, So I've kind of been in the thick of like crowds for the last 5 months, really going out kind of every day, and then there was Picnic, like the Picnic film shoot. So I'm kind of wrapping up that project right now. So it's one of my most interesting projects, I would say, the one on the pandemic. So it's also allowed me to really think about rethink photography in a sense, because like when I was there for these 6 months in France and I was not photographing, I was there essentially to write on my climate change project and research. But I kept thinking that with the pandemic and social distancing, like maybe photography wouldn't be possible anymore, or like the way I would like to go. I like to go close and like do things, like immerse myself in certain spaces. So I was very dejected for a long time that, how do you do photography? And then when I came back, I started, slowly getting my sort of hopes, let's say, of working during the pandemic. And it's been super insightful. Just to give like a small example, like I did the project in the same way, like going out at night and shooting. That's also very amenable to the festivals because the festivals become big things at night. So it's a project again with flash photography at night. What's interesting is when you're photographing the mask at night, in a lot of the cases, like we don't see it that much under normal light, but you can actually discern the contours of people's faces, like the lips, the nose, and their chin. So that kind of it reveals an intense fragility and delicateness of the human being that is part of the photograph, So and I mean, the pandemic has been all about breath. I mean, there was that crazy thing about like contact and like getting COVID by touch, but we've moved away from that, and now we know that it's primarily via breath and like so droplets. So the breath became the central point, and in this project you can actually like, for the first time I could see breath, and that just became the central point of that project, because you could see it a lot in kids, for example, because if you're taking a photograph of a kid wearing a mask, the lips and the breath leaves a very wet imprint on the mask, and you can actually see how delicate and fragile like human life is, because that's how COVID is being transmitted. And so the mask, while becoming a filter and something that provides anonymity, also reveals a lot more. And so the flash photography enabled me to do that. So I mean, I've been sort of in that space, thinking about photography and the pandemic and what it means. I also actually did a film during this time where I shot on thermal camera. So that's so we are kind of putting it together right now. So it's on the edit table. But what's interesting about that film is it's shot on thermal camera, where say you're wearing a mask. If I go very close up and like, or I mean, I don't have to go close up, but like if you're in the frame, like when you're breathing, that registers very strongly because of the mask.
Right.
So all these images are punctured by the presence of the mask, and through the mask you can see the life form because of the breath. And so it's this sort of anonymous mass of people, but all breathing through their masks. And so so there's a photography project and a film project on that. So that was something that I've been working on in the last few months, and I'm super excited to see where it.
Great. This was, that was, I mean, I hadn't heard about any of your brand new projects and whatever you have had going on. So that'd be exciting to see when it comes out. But this has been great, Arko. Thank you so much.